So, hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the concept of tier zero and why tier zero is clearly just an issue with like card design. So, if we think about the meta fairly logically, let's say uh, whatever deck is meta, it doesn't really matter too much what the deck is, but let's go with Vanquish Soul. Let's assume at this given moment, Vanquish Soul could be the best deck, or it could be Blue Eyes, for example, but we'll go over Vanquish Soul first. So with Vanquish Soul, this has a bunch of key weaknesses. So the first one being that it is really weak to non-targeting removal, and there's actually no way for you to play around like literally any hand traps. So for example, normal summon Razin, Ghost Ogre. Yeah, that's actually pretty effective. But that's actually dodgeable if you were to go like Caesar Valius to put Razin back in hand, for example. And that's a way to play around that. But if we save it for like Rock of the Vanquisher, that prevents you from special summoning Razin the next turn, which is actually a pretty effective move in some cases. Specifically with the one card combo, you can't recover the well, you can't special summon the Razin. You do get it for turn 3, so you normal summon Razin then. But yeah, it's pretty terrible, and you have no anything that you can do on the following turn. Versus if we get the full sequence, it'd be like Razin grabs Borger, and then next turn you would grab like a Xiaolong, and then if you try to run over the Razin by battle, we can tag it out for the Borger, and then we can normal summon Razin next turn, and maybe if we're lucky we can protect Rock via Vanquish Soul Heavy Borger being like kind of a big guy. We have those ideas, so that could work in theory. But yeah, Vanquish Soul, assuming this is meta, it's not like that problematic. It wouldn't really prevent you from playing any decks in particular. But alright, now let's move on to Blue Eyes, and let's assume this is the meta, right? At some point, this was kind of the meta, actually, ironically enough. And Vanquish Soul, I think, at some point was pretty poppin', it was pretty popular. But alright, now we have Blue Eyes. Same deal. Let's assume this is the meta. But what is this week to? Well, macro type effects are pretty efficient. So, like, Shifter, pretty good here. Ash Blossom Joe Spring, and it's like fine. Droll could be a little bit better. Ghost Ogre is fairly solid, being able to Ghost Ogre True Light, destroying True Light and preventing it from like continuously applying its effects because they're relatively good, I would say. It's not like broken per se, and you could kind of play without it, but you also have the idea, of course, popping True Light to also wipe your opponent's monsters potentially. Depends on like the exact situation, of course, or exact scenario. But yeah, you have Ghost Ogre, which is fairly solid and fairly reasonable to play. Unlike with Malice, where your best option was to just run like Lancia because there wasn't really any specific one hand trap that was super effective, like Nibiru, not effective. Imperm, not really that effective unless your opponent opened just a single starter. So like either solo Dormouse, solo White Rabbit, because if you opened any extender, you lose hand traps 2 versus 2. And okay, now I think when a meta is the most problematic is when, well, there is legitimately no counter to the deck, right? And Malice, you wouldn't really consider tier 0. And I mean, even if it had tier 0 kind of play rates, well, the other decks would be able to just play against this just fine. Maybe people would just be really enjoying those specific decks. I guess that's why they'd be so popular. And I hate mirror matches and all that, but that's a bit of a different topic. So, yeah, if we were to look at this difference, I think it would just make a less healthy meta in general, where in the terms of like Blue Eyes versus this, the big difference here is that, well, with hand traps, your hand traps are just going to be a lot less effective. So that means the going second player is at a bigger disadvantage than with Blue Eyes or Vanquish Soul, where it was a little bit more fair than this in particular, right? But even then, with these kind of problems, you might say, with Malice, it still wasn't that bad. In terms of tier 0 in Masterville, there were only, I think, like 3 or 4 times where it got like kinda bad. Notably, like with stun, this was pretty disgusting. So with stun, you have like skill drain, uh, normal summon Inspector Border, and all that. Uh, Technically, I think there were like 3 different meta stun decks. We have like Eldritch stun, regular stun, and then we have runic stun. So with those 3 different stun decks, they were insanely consistent and able to break through boards sometimes, which was just really disgusting. And in terms of going second, you can't even prepare any cards against them really, because you have ideas of like Solemn, and then you have really efficient ways to dig for Solemn with like Duality and Prosperity, Card of Demise to draw 3. And then Card of Demise still allows you to activate like Prosperity technically. So you could literally draw 3, right? And then if you did draw with this, you could still draw again, which is kind of gross, right? So you could go like Cards of Demise into X-Rev, but you can only have 5 cards set in the back row. But if you discard your cards, it doesn't really matter. Like, are you going to care if Eldlick's in the graveyard, or if you have Eldlick spell traps, or even runic spell traps in your graveyard? Like, it genuinely would not matter to you. So even if you drew into those, just fine. There'll be more draws for your fountain later, and that's kind of how that goes, right? And then I think another kind of like, it's either close to tier 0 or straight up tier 0. Like we have Tearlament, I guess, where it was tier 0. So let's go with Tearlament. So with Tearlament, what options did you have for Tearlament? Well, in the same way as like Stun, they were like oppressive in the same way where if you're not playing a very specific deck or basically the same deck, you're basically just getting punished for like everything, and it becomes completely unplayable. So I think the issue with tier 0 formats the most, like aside from that singular deck being so strong, is that no other decks can compete, so you're kind of forced to play that deck. That is going to be the biggest issue. And you have to consider how far a deck actually has to go to become like Tearlament disgusting, right? Where like with Blue Eyes, even if Blue Eyes was like 80-90% play rate, that would just be the play rate. It's not as if the cards cannot be countered. The issue with tier 0 is mostly that the cards don't have solid counters, or they are literally like impossible to counter. Like with Runic, for example, Runic Stun, you have ideas of summoning Hugin to protect your like skill drains and such. Like all these cards are protectable. Hugin, absolutely disgusting. And yeah, I mean, if you do utilize these cards, then like what can your opponent do? Like with back row removal, this isn't going to solve anything. So if I were to run evenly matched, that's something I could do. But you have to consider how many cards does my opponent dig through. If they searched a Solemn, basically, well, not search, but like if they drew into a Solemn, they could open it in their hand. So if we play like, let's say 5 Solemn cards, and then we dig 6 cards, or draw/dig 6 cards, like something like that. So you could activate reasonably on the same turn. Duality, Cards of Demise, Runic Fountain effect to draw cards even. You could do all of that in the same turn, cycling through like, well, at most we'll say you cycle like 9 cards, and then you just get completely cooked, right? Because your opponent definitely has not only a floodgate, but also a way to protect that floodgate at an insanely high consistency. And of course, like a lot of your deck with stun in particular, it just becomes useless. All of your engine completely unusable, and then your non-engine also useless. Just all your main deck cards in general, pretty much all useless. Even if you were to put in back row removal into your deck, that could be useless as well. And even if you went first, there was actually a way to completely sack you with Runic Sun, in particular playing a mono Iwato, so you could like normal summon this, and then you could freely resolve your runic spells to like do some removal, just some cleanup work before flipping over your floodgates next turn, and then like hooking your opponent that way. So the issue here is that you don't really have any counterplay or anything you can do about this. But with Blue Eyes or like Vanquish Soul, it's not problematic in that way. It would just simply be just popular, I think, right? Where if we saw these cards at high play rate, it wouldn't be because they're necessarily OP, I don't think. Because I genuinely don't think any of these cards or decks are that brutal, like with Vanquish Soul or Blue Eyes. They don't get to the point where they're tier 0 oppressive in the same way, where even if they have a similar high play rate, you still have the counterplay, right? So, you have Bestials and all that, where you can technically counter Blue Eyes a little bit with that, Ghost Ogre, whatever. And then with like Vanquish Soul, like every single hand trap under the sun works against Vanquish Soul, like just pretty much. You'd be hard pressed to find a hand trap that actually does not work against Vanquish Soul. Like it's kind of crazy in that way, I suppose. But yeah. In particular, the issue with tier zeros, it's going to be that there's no counterplay. The cards are simply too strong to the point where the only thing you can play is that card. So even if a deck has high play rate, as long as it's not so strong and so oppressive that there's nothing else playable, I think it's fine for a deck to just be popular. The only issue, I guess, with this is then the game kind of becomes unfun because you're either ending up in a mirror match or you're just playing the same deck over and over again. So in this case, let's say I'm playing in a Blue Eyes meta, we're playing, we'll go with, I don't know, Dark Magician, just for the sake of it. Like a Dark Magician, I don't think it's like that good, but it doesn't really matter what you're playing. It just has to be something aside from Blue Eyes. So yeah, Dark Magician. So let's say I'm playing DM into Blue Eyes, and every single duel it'll be the same thing for me. My opponent, it might be different for them because they're not really seeing Dark Magician that much. So it's stale in a whole different way, where I'm just playing against the same deck over and over again, regardless of what I play, because there's such a high play rate. So if I play Blue Eyes myself, I'm just playing against Blue Eyes also. If I'm playing Dark Magician, my opponent is playing something new, but I'm still playing against Blue Eyes. And there are only so many decks you could play to get like a different matchup. So I could keep cycling through different archetypes, decks, whatever, if I would end up playing against like Blue Eyes every single time. And that's another kind of consequence of just high play rate versus a deck being like, I guess, tier 0. And I mean, it kind of happens if the deck is tier 0 as well, like with Tier Element meta. No matter what you played, you're probably going to end up playing against Tier Element more or less. And then regardless of win or lose, you're still just playing against Tier Element. And that stales because there's only so much variation you can see in any given matchup. So it's a lot more fun. Well, if we're just going for like fun, just having a more varied meta, like even if it were 3 decks, like I think it is the minimum I would say you would need to have a somewhat diverse meta. Like Ryzeal and Malice, not really interesting. It was just literally just those 2 decks over and over again, and it was for way too long. If we had one more deck, it would be almost tolerable, but still no, because we would end up with that for way too long. We'd have to cycle 3 every once in a while, or more kind of archetypes in and out, I would say, to keep the game like somewhat fresh, just a little bit, right? Otherwise, you're literally seeing the same thing over and over again. And there is also the aspect of those decks always playing like the exact same. So with Malice, for example, the Malice line is basically you just go Malice combo, or you're unable to Malice combo, and then you have your hand traps. And if we just focus on the Malice line, if you don't have the Malice line, it ends on literally like 0 interruption, right? The only interruption you could possibly have is if you hard opened Malice in the Mirror, so you can set Malice in the Mirror and then like banish whatever Malice leftovers you have on the field. With the case of like Ryzeal, it's kind of the same deal where it's like small guy make big guy, and then you have your combo. And then if you can't do that, your small guys do nothing in both cases. So yeah, your opponent has full combo going first, they win. Your opponent does not have full combo, uh, going first, then you win. Going second, if they have too many hand traps, you lose. And their deck is actually completely pathetic going second. So in like Ryzeal Malice Mirror, that's kind of, or not Mirror, Ryzeal Malice meta, that whole meta was kind of just like that. So it stales really hard, and of course their combo lines are like completely bland, and you're just doing the same thing regardless of going first or second, basically, where you're just doing your combo. I don't think like Ryzeal really has a super consistent OTK line either. I mean, you have like a kind of option for OTK, I think. I don't think it was necessarily good though. I think you can get enough Ryzeal cards to go into like on turn 2. You can probably go into like Detonator, Duo Drive, fairly reasonable-ish, and then you can probably add like this card here, and then you go into like Utopic Lancer, I guess, with another rank 4. You could even maybe do Garrus to try to assert or draw into a spell, and then you attack with these 3, and I think that should be lethal, right? 2.5, 2.5, 3k, that's like exact lethal if you have no monsters on the field, I guess. And this attacks twice. So this could attack over like I guess like a set Ash Blossom Drift Ring, attack direct, this attacks, and this has a small attack boost effect that I don't think matters in this example, but yeah, I mean, basically you're just going Go Drive into Detonator, like how you normally play Ryzeal, I guess, regardless of if you go first or second. You just kind of do the same thing. And yeah, I mean, being tier 0 really just means that your deck is just so dumb that there's no way to really effectively counter it. So you have no choice but to play that deck if we're thinking in terms of like playing more competitively, where you have to just play that deck or you get cooked by the deck. Even if you do play the deck, you're playing against the deck, but again, still, but now it's more determined on going first and going second, because that's usually how mirrors go, where, well, it depends on the exact mirror. Like, for example, with Kashtira mirror, this one's an odd one, where the going second player is actually the favored one. But I mean, that's like a thing that would happen for a Tenpai as well, right? But usually there's like one player that's in a more advantageous position, and they just completely will cook the other player, and they don't really have much they can do unless, like, I guess one player just opened way better than the other. And I mean, that can happen, but with decks becoming more consistent, you can expect the outcome to mostly be like going first player just opens combo, they get the combo off because it's really hard to stop because consistency, you know? And then the going second player is in so much disadvantage that they cannot come back from simply, you know, going second, right? Or losing the coin flip. And that'll just lose you the matchup regardless. And even if we disregard like a deck being strong or not, like just going first or second can be pretty make or break. Now, the additional advantage that you need to really get to tier 0 is actually also having a good going second ability. So, you know, normal summon Amano Awato, Eldlik effect for removal, and also the lack of back row removal. And then you have like technically Tikaboo, Rivalry, all that stuff can actually act as removal depending on what your opponent's playing exactly. So if you're playing like, let's say, Tri Brigade, if we activate Rivalry, you're not going to be able to control all of your different like monsters, and you'll just struggle a bit to play. And depending on what your end board is exactly, like let's say you have Apollosa, Shireg, and one other card, those cards, you have to send 2 of those, and you can keep only one of them. And then whatever you keep, that's the only type you can summon. And of course, if you were to try to remove that with some removal, we can chain like skill drain to it, like if you have a Baron on field or something. So yeah, it's pretty cooked in those instances where deck is able to go second and first exceptionally well, and it's the only one that can do it. At least if there were like multiple decks at that level, then we wouldn't really be having this much of an issue, I don't think. So the issue with Tearlament meta, I guess you could even say, I mean, Tearlaments were pretty strong, far and above like every other deck at the time. But what if, let me cook here. What if we just had like two other archetypes on par with like Tearlaments? Then it wouldn't be a Tearlament meta anymore, and it wouldn't be tier 0 anymore, because there are other decks that are equally as strong and viable as Tearlament and do things at a similar level. Like in terms of going second, going first play, maybe they have like some kind of hand trappy cards, like I don't know, let's say Havness, Deer Cash. Then your opponent can play on your turn as well, and it's a fair and even playing ground. And honestly, like the popularity of these decks and then the meta and what would be playable would be a little bit better. But also at the same time, this would still end up pushing out the decks that are not on par with this then, because, well, in terms of like card strength, like let's say we're going with Priest Support, Blue Eyes, and Dark Magician, there's no way you'd be able to compete with Tearlament, and then two decks also on par with Tearlament. So we would be seeing a little bit of an improvement. So, I mean, in an ideal world, what would just happen is everything would be on par with Tearlament, so you could just play whatever you wanted. So you'd be able to play like Dark Magician, Blue Eyes Priest Support, or whatever, versus Tearlament or the other equivalently strong decks as Tearlament. Which then, yeah, in that case, we wouldn't be having this issue anymore. So simply put, we just need like really good support for a lot of different archetypes, which is very difficult to do, I suppose. Or just like a lot of new archetypes that are actually just decent and kind of on par with one another. Because sometimes we do just get like really mediocre kind of archetypes. So if we just go here and say like you are, it's like you are, uh-huh, Argostars. When have you seen anyone play Argostars? Like barely, right? Uh, Goblin Bikers is like fine, but it's not like something you'll see that often. It's like maybe a 1 in 20 games you'll see a Goblin Biker, if at all. Like a lot of different variants here, like essentially. If we were like playing competitively, I don't think you would see these as much, because you'd want to play like kind of the best option for like the scenario. Like at the moment, I think we have an okay amount of, should be like Draco Tail, a little bit of Dragon Maid, some Sky Striker, mostly Sky Striker, a lot of Sky Striker popularity right now, and that's what we're mostly seeing. Nothing like super solid at the moment from what I remember. But yeah, I mean, well, actually, no, there's a lot of White Forest actually. So the current meta, pretty chill, and you could play most things. It just sucks, of course, no matter what meta, just going second in general. So you kind of get cooked in all those situations. But aside from that, you're just vibing really, and you're able to play what you want. So in a more diverse meta, you're given more choice in what you're able to play. So like there are like issues in a lot of cases. Like for example, let's say there's several meta decks at the moment and they're all weak to draw, then you're free to just play something that's not weak to draw and you have a small advantage, and you can kind of use that to play like your favorite deck that's not affected by draw. You have ideas of maybe like Imperm is really popular, so you can play your favorite deck that's not like getting cooked by Imperm, or able to play around the Imperm, like Fire King, I guess, is fine, right? To play around Imperm, yeah. So we have ideas like that, and I think that's perfectly fine. Speaking of which, Fire King was designed pretty damn well. Not super impressive, still fairly strong, decent going second and first ability. Like, damn, they cooked hard with Fire King. just to go over a quick line, we have like idea of activate a normal summon, effect of Kirin to pop, and then if you pop the Kirin with this effect, it would be non-targeting, right? Whatever pop effect you're activating. Or you can pop Kirin later, and then that acts as removal for when you're going second. And otherwise, it's just a monster reborn for going first. Like, that's cooking. But anyway, um, with these cards, I mean, it's mostly just being on an even playing field and not being like too far above everything else. I think that's the best outcome. With tier 0, you're just going too far and above like all of the other decks and leaving them behind and making them pretty unplayable, even without like, well, even with options like considering to counter those decks specifically, you're still getting cooked for various reasons. Like, for example, what if your opponent is not playing those cards? Or not playing those cards? Like, they're not playing the deck, I guess, like the meta deck. Because you have to focus so hard on the meta deck, like with Malice. Let's say it's Malice meta, right? And you're playing Malice. Here's an issue. So you play like your Malice cards. Your opponent drops a Lancia on you. Oh, big sad. Lancia. Depression, right? But then, let's say you are now playing this Lancia against a guy who is not like Malice. Then we have something like, I don't know, normal summon Lacrima. Damn. Beansmith really doesn't banish anything. So, resolving Lancia, what does this do for you? Nothing. You have just 3 bricks in your deck, which is a 30% chance to open this, so that's like a 1 in 3 games. You have a brick against every, like, non-Malice deck, basically. I mean, this might be useful against certain decks, like maybe against Memento. You can Lancia to prevent Memento fusion from searching a card, I suppose. That's like one of 2 cards this actually affects against Memento. I think it's probably still going to be combo. Like, yeah. But you stop the search. Very epic indeed. So, yeah, I mean, the deck being far and above, like, better than the other decks, that's problem here with tier 0, I think. And then, I mean, like, popularity, if a deck is tier 0 in that regard, then it's just boring to play against the same deck over and over again. And it's good to have some variation. But, you know, there are a limited amount of cards that are going to be viable at any given time, so there's, like, a limit to what you could play, in theory, to an extent. But, yeah. I think one way you could combat this is by, like, stopping power creep, for example. So, let's say we want every deck to be around the power level of, let's say, Tearlament, or, for example, Fiendsmith, right? Then, if we just release decks at that level, then, you know, we could play all of the previous decks that were playable, and we could also play the new decks, because they're also viable. Maybe they just have a better matchup into certain decks. That'd be fine. It doesn't have to be like broken or super oppressive, and we'd be completely chillin'. So no need for all this pain with like Lancia, Dormouse, Malice, Interrupt's not working, frustration, all of that stuff, right? We could have it simple. We could have it good. If only. But yeah, I mean, if we look at Alta support, I'll tell you what, this is like some of the worst support I've ever seen. So yeah, deck kind of losing whatever identity it had left, and then the support not even functioning. So even if you did like the new playstyle doesn't even like really work. So yeah, I mean, that's terrible, I suppose. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.